and welcome to Monday's session. Welcome to tonight's session. Tonight, or depending if you're watching the replay, today, we're going to be covering something that is key to improving as a designer, right? We're going to be talking about this one step that a lot of you actually already know what it is, right? It's a very important part of the feedback process, but of the design process, sorry. But this one piece can be the difference between you making a lot of progress or feeling stuck and not feeling like you made any progress. And while this is true for design, this is a very general concept, anything you're trying to learn in life, right? We're going to be talking about what exactly that concept is today. But besides that, we have a new schedule now. So earlier, we were planning to do these 5 days a week, but then we realized 5 days a week is just too much. It starts feeling too much like, something you're forced to attend. Ah. So we decided to cut this down. Rather than 5 days a week, we're going to be having a dynamic schedule. All right. We're going to have a very dynamic schedule, which is we're not going to say fixed to these many sessions a week. What we will be doing is instead doing a few sessions every week, and the exact schedule for which, the way you can get access to it, would be to visit our career guide page. So on the career guide, you will see session replays of all the previous sessions. But to check out when the next session is, like this one, session 4, to check this out, you would need to enroll and you just get a reminder. But in general, we'll be doing this in a way more dynamic way. Welcome everybody. Okay, welcome to tonight's session. The topic I want to talk to you about is the idea of progress. Number one, let's start with progress. How do you know whether you're making progress or not? This is something that I have struggled with. And the reason for that is because you would typically look for indicators of progress, right? हम देखेंगे कि हम improve हो रहे हैं या नहीं. You look for indicators. And typically these indicators, if you zoom back, in school time, for example, your only indicator whether you were successful were your marks. There was this sort of external indicator which said that this is your, let's say, 10th grade, these are your marks, maybe you have boards. And those were sort of these external indicators that say, hey, you are on the right path. When you go to school, when you go to college, and when you go to work, eventually these indicators change, but you have some semblance that you are going on the right path as time passes. And these kind of indicators are important because you want to feel progress. If you feel like you're not making progress, you are more likely to give up. And ideally, we don't want that. We don't want you to give up, right? We want you to be able to stick through whatever it is that you have started. And today we're going to be going a little deeper into this concept to how to figure out you're making progress. Now, the real problem actually doesn't come in school times. The real problem comes when you're maybe in college, but you want to study something other than your degree, right? Maybe you're in computer science and you want to do design. Maybe you are in a commerce background and you now want to get into design, or if it's a different field that you want to get into. Now, the problem starts where you don't have other people around you who will tell you, yes, you are making progress or improve over here, right? When that happens, it feels like, hey, I don't know whether I'm moving forward or whether I'm moving in the same direction. And in general, the concept that I want you to remember from today is the idea of a feedback loop. A feedback loop, right? Anytime you do something, you need that feedback of whether it went well, whether it didn't go well, and based on that, your decision in the future will change. Let me take a very simple example, right? Let's say I was self-learning, for example. Let's start with my story. When I first started learning design, I was doing it by myself and it worked for me, right? For a lot of people, self taught is still the way to get started and it's the way to go for a lot of people. However, the problem started coming when I was like, okay, I know Photoshop now. I know how to design a few things. How do I move forward from this? How do I move forward from this? Like, what's next for me? And of course, I looked at online resources, I had all of that. But for me, the real feedback loop kicked in a little late. And for me, I'll tell you what that feedback loop was. Initially, I would do the work. I would design, let's say, some sample screens or something. Or maybe I would design a poster. And now suddenly I don't know whether it's good, whether I can improve it or not. Right? So naturally, my feedback became the people around me who are also doing design. Right? Typically, that's where it starts. When you compare your work to them, that is a type of feedback that you're getting, right? They don't have to say, change this, change this. That's not the only type of feedback. You can just get feedback by observing their work. When you look at their work and you see that they are at a certain standard, you immediately know, okay, here's where I am in comparison to them. Similarly, when you use the internet, you can do something similar, but there is one problem with that, right? You can, of course, look at other people's work and you can use that as feedback to figure out where do you stand right now. Are you almost at the level of, let's say, some designer that you come across their work, or are you a little lower than that? Or have you already crossed that path? However, the problem is that you don't want to compare yourself as a beginner to somebody who's an expert, right? That's the problem people make, and it has a negative effect, which is you end up getting demotivated. So, this missing ingredient in general is feedback loop, right? And the reason I call it a loop and I don't just say feedback, the reason I call it a loop is that you do the work, you get some feedback, and then you do the work again. That creates a loop, right? In any other skill as well, you need feedback loops to make sure that every time you do an iteration, let's say, right? And now, of course, let's not use complicated terminology. Let's just keep it simple, okay? Every time you do the same work again and again, maybe you designed one app or one sample app, you designed a few screens. The next time you do it, ideally you should improve based on your previous one. It should be better than your previous, right? At the bare minimum, you don't want to get worse. You want to either stay the same or get better. The way you get better, right? You've probably heard this. I think it's a very common cliche kind of phrase which says madness is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. I think it's something like that, right? You don't want to be doing the same thing over and over again and not making any progress, right? I don't 100% agree with that quote, although, but when you do things over and over again and you're not changing anything, you might be just moving in the same place. It might be a more of a treadmill rather than actually running. Ideally, between your practice sessions, right? Your practice session one, maybe you're designing something. Next day or 2 days later, you design something again. Third day, you design something again. And now I'm talking for the people who are more of self taught, people who are still learning. You want some feedback such that between the two sessions, you know something that you can improve, right? That's what creates a feedback loop. And if a feedback loop doesn't exist, it doesn't close, right? It stays an open loop. What that means is you do something, you get no feedback or you don't seek any feedback. And now when the second time you do it, you don't know what to change. So you do the exact same thing again. And you might do the exact same thing a third time, exact same thing a fourth time. And that means you're not making progress, right? So feedback loops are very important. I'll tell you what my feedback loops were. When I first started, my initial feedback loop was, of course, asking friends. Asking friends, number one, how can I change this? What do you think of this? Right? Very basic stuff. But beyond that, a lot of the stuff I didn't really ask. I just looked, I just observed. I looked at other work and I said, I know I am not at this level, but how can I break it down to figure out the steps that I can use to reach the level I want, right? And the way to do that is through a feedback loop. Now, in a company, you will also have this idea of a feedback loop exists throughout, right? One of the reasons you have this concept of marks and everything in college is because they've created their own version of a feedback loop to make sure people keep moving through the system, right? When you eventually get an internship or a job, the kind of feedback loop you have there will change, right? And really quick, let me know in the chat. Ab tak, are you all um, on the same page? मतलब समझ में आ रहा है, okay? Are you able to understand? And we'll do some questions also after this, by the way. When you're working as an internship or maybe you get a job, the feedback loop at that point changes. The reason when you're applying for a job, you want to work with somebody who's a good manager, you want to work with a good team, is number one, if the team is way better than you will eventually rise to that same level, right? So you want to work as much as possible in a team that is better than you, right? So that you now have to increase your standards, right? That's the importance of choosing a good role. But beyond that, a manager is somebody who will helps set your feedback loops on top of your process. That's one of the main roles of a manager. Other than there's a lot of other roles, but one of the main roles is making sure you do your best work. And the way you do your best work is you do something and the manager helps you set direction. The manager will say, this is what's good about it. However, this is what we actually want. We want something like this. And I think you should change your direction to help reach this point. And when you do that, you now have feedback and you do it again. And now maybe you have a better outcome. A manager is somebody who does this for you, whether it's in an internship or if it's at a job. I want you to just imagine what would happen if there wasn't a feedback loop, right? Well, let's talk about the job side of things. If there wasn't a feedback loop, you're doing, let's say, an internship, and they ask you to do some work, and then they say, boss, feel नहीं आ रही इसमें feel नहीं आ रही, कुछ और कर सकते हैं. Now, that the problem with that kind of feedback, कि feel नहीं आ रही, is that it tells you something is wrong, but it doesn't tell you which direction to go. It doesn't say feel नहीं आ रही, but feel यहाँ पे है. ऐसा कुछ try करो, या ऐसा कुछ try करो, right? That's the biggest problem with getting feedback like that. But imagine if they didn't tell you anything. You would just do the work and you just kept doing it. And you had no idea whether it was going well or not. Typically, that's when there's a feedback loop missing, right? So today, that was the main topic I want to talk about. We'll do a little bit of questions, okay? We'll talk about a few more things. But the main takeaway, right? And then we'll get into Q&A. I'll do a quick takeaway. When you are getting started as a self-taught designer and you don't have a manager, let's say, you're not working for anybody yet, you need some type of feedback loop. Some type of feedback loop. I'm assuming most of you are self-learning. I have been self-taught as well. My feedback loop initially was my friends, right? They were also doing design and I would ask them. That's probably the first place you should start. Try to find other people who are also on a similar journey like you. There's a lot of communities out there, right? I would definitely suggest joining the 10K designers community, right? There are a lot of channels there. You can definitely ask for feedback. I don't remember exactly what the URL is. Let me just share that. You can definitely join the 10K designers community, right? There's a lot of people there who are also in a similar position. If you don't have people around you who are also designers, this is number one. It's super important, right? Being able to do this, because doing this by yourself when you don't know anybody else who's doing something similar can be demotivating, right? It can be demotivating because you feel like you're the only one doing something, right? So that's very important. As a self-taught designer, try to find other people who are also designers. And number two, I would say, is eventually you want to start actually freelancing. Now, this might seem like um, odd advice, right? How can I start freelancing if I'm still a beginner? Freelancing is usually important because even as a beginner, when you freelance, you get the idea of what it's like to work in a feedback loop, right? You work with, let's say, some client. Maybe they have a small project for you. They're like, hamare liye just design a couple of ads for us, a couple of banners for us. Let's say it's some kind of graphic design kind of thing. A feedback loop exists because you don't have 100%, you don't have unlimited time. You have fixed number of hours. Something needs to get done. And typically doing multiple of this can help you get that kind of experience, right? A question that I have here, which is any tips on asking feedback from experienced designers? Now, the biggest tip is to understand that they are actually doing you a favor, right? And this is actually really hard. Asking feedback from other designers is harder or just as hard as you would expect, technically. It is super hard though, because the problem is giving feedback is something which takes a lot of time and effort, right? And besides that, the person giving the feedback, they want to know that, hey, my feedback will be used as, will be useful. My feedback, if I'm going to spend this much time, will actually be useful. They don't want to give you the wrong feedback by accident. Now, the problem is if you don't have any kind of relationship with them, then there's no incentive for them to spend that time, maybe 20, 30 minutes giving you feedback. Or if they don't know what exactly you're trying to do with your project, that can be super hard as well, right? So my tips is, ideally you want to find somebody who cares. And once you find that person, try to maintain a relationship with them. The problem is if you just directly ask, right? If you directly ask without giving anything in return, that's a one-sided relationship, right? So as a self-taught designer, if you do want to ask from experienced people, you have to understand that their time is extremely valuable. So if you are reaching out to some of them, you have to make it worth their while sometimes, right? And I don't have a solid feedback or a way to do this. Let me think more about this. But I would definitely start. I would definitely suggest starting with the Discord community, because we have a dedicated feedback channel there, and some of our alumni and some of our mentors of 10K designers are kind of active there, right? So I would definitely start there, but it is definitely tricky getting feedback, right? Unless it's a real project, unless they have hired you for it, or you are working with them on the same team. With these two reasons, it's very, like, your incentives are really aligned, right? The reason they would give you feedback is you're on the same project, and now for the project success, they know you also need to be successful. Now that's a perfect incentive. But if you're not doing that, it can be difficult. Yeah. Let me play some lo-fi in the background. What else? What else? Tell me this. What else can we talk about in today's session? Right? I don't have anything planned, but mostly I wanted to talk about this because I think that's one of the biggest challenges that people face, having a good type of feedback loop. And I will say this about feedback as well, which is, you don't asking somebody how can I improve and them telling you is not the only way of receiving feedback. Feedback can be implicit or explicit. Explicit would be them directly telling you, hey, this is the direction, this is what you want to change. But implicit feedback would be you trying to figure out yourself, you comparing with, let's say, somebody else, their work. Or ideally, you don't want to compare yourself to others who might be experts when you're a beginner. You want to compare yourself to your previous design, right? That is a solid feedback loop if you can get that going. if you are able to look at your own work and figure out how can I improve this, and you're able to find a few things that you can improve, like that feedback loop is like no other, right? Because you are the main one there. What's up, Prakhar? Good to see you here, bro. Let's take a few more questions. Can you explain what design does? What does it do in detail? Check out the channel on my video called "A Day in the Life of a UI UX Designer." You will get to know. Other than that, you can also check out the design crash course playlist on my channel. You can check that out. Interesting question. What happens when your work is good but your manager is pessimistic? How do you then figure it out? The people that you work with, that's one of the biggest decisions you will make in your life, right? The people you work with, that's one of the biggest decisions you will make, because you are going to be spending your day-to-day with them. I would strongly suggest if you're applying for a company, you would want to work with people who are better than you, right? I of course don't know your full details, Samuel. What I would say is you ideally want to find a better manager, right? Because an ideal manager is somebody who cares for your growth. If they themselves are pessimistic, what you will receive from them is pessimism, right? So it is a very important decision that you will take, which is what company do you really want to join. Let's do a few more questions, right? Let's talk about feedback loop from the perspective of a side project. This is something that must be very common, right? It's very common with me as well. But you start any side project or a personal project with a lot of enthusiasm, and then eventually that it fizzles. The interest fizzles around it, or you're like, just khatam karte hain isko, I'm not feeling it anymore. And the reason for that is typically feedback loops, right? If you are starting a project by yourself, a self-initiated project, especially if this is something that people are going to be using, if this is some kind of side hustle or a monetizable product, let's say, right? Let's say it's something that you're actually launching. The reason most people lose motivation is because the feedback loop is too large, right? It keeps going like this and doesn't close, right? And eventually the feedback loop is so large that you don't find out. Let me give you an example of that. Let's say you started a project today, but it took you some while to do it, but you only find out 1 year later if it's good or not. Would that motivate you or demotivate you? Here's the reason why that would demotivate you. It would demotivate you because you have to wait for a year to get that feedback. The feedback loop closes only 1 year later. Versus if you can figure out every 3 days, let's say, some kind of feedback loop, some kind of mechanism which says, am I on the right track? Do I need to change anything? Keep doing that, right? This is one of the reasons people have mentors. What is a mentor? A mentor is somebody who has been through a similar experience and can help you figure those things out. The reasons people have mentors is because they are sort of this external person who can look at what you've done, figure out where you're trying to go, and figure out the path that you have, whether it's the right one or not. So the way to be motivated in self-initiated projects is to set up some kind of feedback loop, right? Which is one of the reasons in startups, they say you want to launch as early as possible. Is because if you wait to launch, you're delaying getting feedback. And by that time, a lot of things might change, including you losing your motivation. So ideally, if you're working on a product, you want to keep launching. You want to keep launching such that you get some amounts of feedback just to know whether you're going in the right direction or not. I want to start learning UX. Where can I learn? Right on this channel. We have a playlist called Crash Course in UI UX Design. Check that out. Let me take a few more questions, and then I'll we'll talk about some more stuff. Yeah. How do you motivate yourself when you lose consistency? The main way to do this, actually, I don't have a good answer. I don't have a very good answer, right? The actual way you want to fix it is you want to find out what led you to lose the motivation in the first place, what led you to break consistency, and whether there's something you can do to fix that, right? Ideally, that's the way you do it. But other than that, again, I don't have the full details of your situation, but the way you bring back consistency, right? Maybe the reason you lost it was too big of a project. Like you realized halfway through that, dude, I'm never going to finish this. This is going to take me too long. Maybe that's the reason. In that case, what you would do is you might scope down. You might say, instead of trying to do this big thing, let me now first start small, then do slightly bigger, then slightly bigger, and then I do that, right? So the way you motivate yourself when you lose consistency is to start over again, right? Starting over is something you will have to do a lot of times, right? Except the next time that you start, make sure you have better feedback such that it's a better success than last time. The concept of a feedback loop is that once you receive this feedback, you have to start over. You have to start over and you have to make another iteration. You have to start over again. So if it feels like you're doing the work again and again and you keep having to start over, that's actually a good thing because it means you're putting more iterations in. And as long as your current iteration is better than your previous iteration, you are making progress, right? That's the thing that matters at the end of the day, which is every single project that you do adds up to the kind of designer you want to become. If you want to become a really good designer, that does not happen overnight. The way that happens is by doing small projects that move in the direction of really good. And that means doing it consistently over a certain period of time. So, yeah, that's my answer for, you know, figuring this out. Let me do a really quick announcement as well. We are launching a new cohort. However, I think a lot of you are beginners, so you might not be right for this cohort. However, let me just talk about it anyways. This new cohort is going to be called Design MBA. You guys saw Jenil on one of the previous sessions. This is one of his cohorts. This is still an experimental cohort. We're trying to figure out whether there's a need for something like this. But if this is something you're interested in, if you're already a designer, if you're already halfway through your career, or maybe a few years in your career, check this out. This might be useful to you. But besides that, let's do a few more questions and then we wrap up for today. Okay. What do you do if you don't have people around for feedback? The problem is you need some people around for feedback. You cannot learn design in isolation. Let me tell you why. When you're designing, you are not designing for yourself. You're designing for other people, right? Maybe these are the users who this application is meant for, who the app is meant for. Maybe if you're a graphic designer, maybe you're doing banners and posters. You're not doing this for yourself. You're doing this for the person on the other side who's going to see it. So if you don't have people around your feedback, it's very difficult because then you become your only source of feedback, which is okay. But then at some point, you do need to work with other people, right? One of the differences between being an artist, the difference between being an artist and a designer is, as an artist, it's about your personal expression. You are making work that talks about your personal experience. You are doing something because you thought it was a good idea. And typically, you're trying to send some kind of message through this art, right? It's about something. When you look at design, design is more about problem solving. You're never designing, very rarely are you designing for yourself. You're designing for other people. And to design for other people, you need to talk to other people to figure out what exactly is it that they want. I'm not even talking about user research. I'm just talking about the fact that design is in some ways a multiplayer sport. It's not a single player activity. It's multiplayer in the sense that design as designers, you're typically working for, let's say, a client who is in a different field who still needs design. And now you have to quickly understand their field so you can apply the design process for their problem statement. Or design is you working in a team that might be in a company. You have other designers on your team, you have engineers, you have all of these other business units. So design is never in isolation. So if you don't have people around you for feedback, get to a point where you can have people around you for feedback. It might start with other friends, other people you know who are also doing design. Eventually, it should get into freelance, because with freelance, you are literally getting paid to receive feedback. A freelance project is an exchange where you are doing some amount of work that is valuable to the client. It doesn't have to be something crazy. Keep in mind, people are looking for freelancers at every level. Not everybody is looking for an experienced designer with a lot of experience, because they probably might not even be able to afford that person. With freelancers, with freelance clients, the exchange is that you do a certain amount of work for a client. They give you feedback on how to improve it. Together, you work on something which is a project, it's a product, and you get paid for this. And the reason you get paid for this is because the client has gotten something that can help them in their business. So what you've designed, directly or indirectly, needs to help the client's business. It's not just art, right? Design is problem solving. The reason you get hired as a designer is to solve problems, usually business problems, that have some impact on the business, right? So that was my answer. If you don't have people around you for feedback, it is going to be difficult. So try to find friends, try to do freelancing, try to do internships, um, so that you get that feeling as soon as possible of what it's like designing in a multiplayer environment. So, folks, we're going to do a few more questions. Okay. What exactly do you need to improve in design, right? Whether you are a beginner, whether you've been designing for some time, whether you're looking for a better opportunity, what do you need to get better? The answer is not just an online course, right? We of course have our cohorts. You can check those out if those are right for you. But besides that, let me give you the simple formula. We've talked about feedback loop, but now let me give you the full equation of how do you improve as a self-taught designer. Number one, you need to understand the industry. You need to understand what exactly does a designer do and what exactly are these terms. What is wireframing? What is information architecture? You need to understand the vocabulary. If you're really, really basic, that's like really, really beginner, that's the basic stuff that you need to start with, right? In any field, you first need to understand how that industry works by understanding the vocabulary of that field. And that's when you start forming this mental map of how everything is connected. So you need information and theory. That's what you would start with. Then you need to learn the tools, or maybe the tools first, even. Then you need to practice, right? Most people might not be able to do it just with watching videos, or just reading textbooks, or just looking at other people designing. You have to actually do it yourself, right? That piece is practice. You need some way to keep practicing your craft, right? A simple example of this would be if you're learning guitar. If you're learning how to play the guitar, you can watch other people play the guitar. You can see what kind of chord progressions they do. You can learn about what the chords are. but eventually you have to sit down with the guitar and do it yourself, right? You need practice. And when you do this enough times, it creates this feedback loop, which is every single time you do this, the next time you should get marginally better. The third time you should get marginally better than the first and second time. And as you keep doing this, you keep moving in a direction. The reason mentors can be useful is as you're moving in this direction, they can help you change directions. They might say, hey, this is a better path to take. This might be a faster route to get to where you want. But all of that is dependent on the fact that you need to figure out the basics, then you need to practice, and you need to keep getting better with each iteration that you do. Okay, so folks, that's about it for today's session. Hopefully that gave you some idea of what the missing ingredient is in self-learning. It's feedback. It's the feedback loop. You need some way to figure out how you can make yourself better, because to have external mentors, they need to be invested in you, because giving feedback is a time intensive process, right? It's good feedback is a valuable gift. So personally, I never take that for granted, right? The way you will do that is try to find incentives, try to find people who have a good incentive to help you out, ideally because they're on your team or you're working with them together somehow, right? Besides that, cohort 4 applications are open. We haven't started sending out any emails yet. We're going to start doing that today or tomorrow. We will keep you posted on that. But till then, I'll see you in a different session. Our next session is, I don't know when exactly it's going to be. I'm going to keep you posted on that. But the best way to know when the next session is to enroll. Enroll in this. It's free. You just get an email when it happens. If you want to get feedback and you want to ask some more questions, let me real quick show you what you can do about that. You can join our Discord. Our Discord has a bunch of people from some amazing companies, right? We have maybe about close to 6,000 designers in this Discord. We have sessions called feedback. We've got channels dedicated to alumni as well, if you want to ask the alumni certain questions. But besides that, feel free to check this out, and maybe it can help you in your design journey. Talk to you all later. Bye-bye.